What's up, you guys? JC here. Back by popular demand, I've got Jason Conley. This is going to be yet another banger. He's calling in from FCI Sheridan, which is in Portland, Oregon. This is Mob True Crime with Gene and JC. Please make sure that you guys smash the like button, share this video, subscribe, ring the notification bell so you get notifications on time. So without further ado, let's get this thing going.
Jason Conley.
This call will be recorded and subject to monitoring at any time. To accept this call, press 5.
The only thing we got in here is our respect. The question is what are you going to do when you're out here slumming it with the rest of us? Because the safety of these numbers comes with a price. There are no free rides here. Everyone puts in work, whether you clicked up or not. I understand. I'm not talking about helping us with our computer skills. You'll get your hands dirty like the rest of us.
You may begin speaking now.
Hey, Jeff. So, last time we were talking, we were discussing the conspiracy laws and how the conspiracy laws basically bring in multiple people who may or may not know each other onto a federal indictment. And that's basically what my current case is right now. I'm being charged with conspiracy to deliver heroin, meth, and a whole bunch of other things. But this isn't my first federal case. This is my second. My first federal case was for felon in possession of a firearm. I was basically a kid, and I had caught a state gun case, and DA that I had beat in jury trial twice, once on a robbery and another on a tampering with a witness, had referred my case to the ATF and DEA. And so they had picked up an investigation on me, and shortly after, I found myself in custody for felon in possession of a firearm. But what's really interesting, Jeff, is currently the felon in possession of a firearm. I don't know if you've been following that, but the Ninth Circuit basically ruled that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is a big deal, ruled that the 922G, which is felon in possession of a firearm, they declared it to be unconstitutional for the government to prohibit a non-violent felon from being able to possess a firearm. Did you hear about that?
Yeah, I have heard about that case, and hopefully something happens. That way I can actually use firearms legally in the future.
Well, there's been a lot of litigation all around the world, and I follow this closely. They basically argue that there's not a historical context to be able to take away gun rights from people, from any type of class of people, whether they're felons or poor or minorities or whatever, that constitutionally that they have a right to bear arms irrespective of the fact that they possess a felony. And so, but anyways, it's interesting to see them now questioning this and possibly overturning this, because my first federal case, I received a rather long prison sentence for felon in possession of a firearm. And so I know that there's a lot of guys here, honestly, probably about a quarter of the Federal Bureau of Prisons is serving time currently on felon in possession of a firearm case. So in my first case, I pled guilty to felon in possession of a firearm, as I just stated, and they gave me 92 months. And so I went to federal prison, and that was my first time in prison.
Yeah, who knows, Jason? Maybe we'll get lucky. You know, we've got a Supreme Court that's conservative and pro-firearm, and then we've got the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is liberal and more pro-criminal. So between the two, who knows? We might get lucky.
We'll see where that goes, bro.
Jason, get into the whole concept of programming, as it's called, and keep this to within woods or whites, basically. In the federal system, obviously, there's white dudes from all over America that end up in the same states. A lot, you're of Irish descent, so am I. Of course, we have a lot of Italian and Irish friends back east. You once lived in Chicago. I did my business back there. And then, of course, New York guys also are in the system. And on the one of the upcoming shows, we'll get into some of the bigger name like Mobsters and whatnot that guys from the West Coast, along with some of the younger dudes from back east, helped work together to keep track of and make sure they didn't have any issues. But for now, just keep the programming talk to what happens with states and within our racial group, if you will. Again, we'll get into the other stuff at another time. Go ahead, bro.
Sure. So I was young. I was in my early 20s, and I had never been in prison before. So going to federal, I went to federal prison first, which is
This call is from a federal prison.
that's kind of backwards. Most people go to state prison and then end up in the feds. Well, I went to federal prison first. My first prison sentence was a long federal prison sentence, and I had detainers, warrants out of several counties, and I was young, and I was getting in trouble, and so my custody was high, so I was designated to a high security federal prison when I was 23 or 24. I was designated to USP Leavenworth. Leavenworth currently is a medium security prison. I think that the Bureau of Prisons has made an effort to turn all the old prisons like Marion, Leavenworth, Lompoc, Atlanta, all these really old federal prisons, turn them into FCIs, turn them into mediums because of the blind spots and the structure of the facilities were really unsafe. And so when I got to Leavenworth, it was a change of pace for me, man. You know, I grew up on the streets. I grew up in crime. I grew up in bad neighborhoods. I was a city kid. You know, there was nothing really that I wasn't exposed to. I had seen people shot. I had seen people robbed. I had been part of all sorts of, I had, experienced life on the streets thoroughly. But none of that prepared me for what being in a high security federal prison was like. It was really, 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 it was a dangerous environment. You know, the way that it works is everybody divides by their state, right, and by their race. So, I was, as a white guy, and being from California, my car, as they would call it, was the California white guys. Now, just because you're from California doesn't necessarily mean, and you're white, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be in the California, independent California car. Because if you're a gang member from California, like a national gang member, like a dirty white boy or a skinhead or something, that would be your car. But I was a white guy from California, and so, I belong to California white guys. In Leavenworth. Let me speak about in Leavenworth, because it was different in Lompoc and it was different in Atwater. And those were two other prisons I was at. Both of those were in California, though. But while I was at Leavenworth, which is in Kansas, for anybody who doesn't know, my car was really technically the West Coast car, because it was comprised mostly of California guys, but also of like Oregon, Washington, and Arizona guys. And the way that car operated was each unit had a rep and all that stuff. But since it was small, it avoided a lot of the internal political pulling and prodding that took place on other yards that I was at. The expectation was that you were going to work out yourself ready in case there's any problems. You weren't going to just sleep in bed all day. You were going to be up in the morning. You were going to be programming to a certain degree. There was a strong push from the other guys to make sure that you were an asset, right? But that's kind of like how, prison is, right? Like you can't just be in those levels of prisons. You can't just be a guy that nobody's really sure is going to be useful, particularly if things get chaotic, right? They want you to be ready or be an asset somehow. Some guys are just smart and they work at the law library and those sort of things, or, they help with, legal cases and whatnot. But for the most part, guys are pushing you to at least improve physically. There was workout cars. Of course, when I was young, you had to go out and do burpees every day, by the 100, work out with the guys, and yada yada yada. And I did all those things. You would go out, and then you'd have running day, and there'd be a bunch of people be out on the yard running and that sort of thing. But it was a bad environment. There were always problems. There were always incidences on the yard. People would get hurt. People would get killed. I was there for about 4.5 years, and I went to Lompoc. And I was at Lompoc for a little while before I went to Atwater. And both of those prisons are in California. The difference between those prisons and Leavenworth was California guys dominated those yards. And of course, being in California, most of the people that were there in those prisons were from California. There was a very small constituency of people that weren't. So those ones had a ton of inner turmoil in the California car. Guys would run up dead, get themselves into wrecks with other guys in the car. They would get too high. They'd get too drunk. They'd say certain things that other people took offense to. And people would make decisions that these guys would have to go, and of course, they would have to go. The constant pressure of that type of living, it takes its toll on you. It creates a lot of, imbalances, the safety factor, and you always have to measure what people say, constantly making sure that you're in your right lane. The margin of error, of course, is very small, and you never know if guys decide that you're no good, or
This call is from a federal prison.
or think that you've overstepped yourself. Nobody comes and consults you on that. You usually get a few warnings, and then they just send the guys at you and get rid of you. And so as a youngster, I just, you learn to watch your environment, be very circumspect. I did drink a lot, but I avoided some of the other harder drugs like the heroin and those sort of things, which a lot of other guys got into. And those were the things, the poker tables, the gambling tables, those are the sort of things that I've seen a lot of guys get fucked up over. And, the California guys, it was a different bunch. The California white guys, I'll be honest with you, I made some really good friends, because the guys are very attentive to the car, and, a lot of guys from other cars, that because of the size of the California car, a lot of guys from other cars, will speak to this, that the California guys really look out for you. If there was really, if you're from California, the guys made sure that you had what you need, and everything else, whether if it was food or hygiene or just that other guys weren't pressing an issue with you unnecessarily, unfairly. I will say this, though, they also probably were the worst drug addicts out of every other car that there was. Particularly with heroin. The heroin was really, really, really bad in the federal penitentiaries that I was in with the California guys. Well, I'll tell you this. When I was at Leavenworth, I had never been in Kansas before. And the biggest white cars on that yard was the Oklahoma car and probably the Iowa or Missouri car. And the Oklahoma car, of course, being the largest. And, those guys, obviously they don't have the type of political structure that is common to the California guys, because the California guys coming out of the state prison, their state prisons there's a lot of really kind of factional. There's a lot of inner struggle in between those cars. They typically have multiple reps because they don't like to it's a good old boy deal with those guys, and they battle each other a lot. They get into it with the other cars a lot. It's just a different thing. It's just a different thing. It's really hard to quantify. It's really sometimes hard to articulate, but I had never been around some of the gangs. It was really a cultural experience for me because I had been unfamiliar. I had never met people from several of those states. And so to hear the political conversations that took place, between them, like the Oklahoma and Texas guys hate each other, the Iowa and the Missouri guys don't like each other. Some of this has to do with their state politics. So the difference between the guys from California and being in a different state was real interesting to me, as we've already discussed some of the cultural things. But something else that was real interesting was, man, when I was in Leavenworth, there were a pretty...
This call is from a federal prison.
There there were a large group of Italian guys, some of the old mob guys that got indicted on RICO acts back in the 80s, and they made up a pretty good portion of the population there. And those guys are really interesting because they got their own cultural thing. You'd see them out on the yard, and they walk real close to each other, kind of like arm in arm. You know, we wouldn't do that, but you'd see them guys out there, and they they hug, and they do like you would see in the movies, like they kiss each other on the cheek and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so they got their own kind of style to them, but there was a lot of those guys out there.
You're absolutely right. I noticed that on the streets as well. That was a big difference between the guys who operated on the West Coast versus the Midwest. Although it grew on me too as I was getting closer and closer to those dudes doing the weed stuff. I'd pick them up at the airport and, hey, what's up? How you doing? How's everybody back there doing? I didn't do the kiss on the cheek thing.
When I left the feds, I left in 2011 on the first one. I got out of the halfway house, and things descended pretty quickly. I got my own place and stuff like that. Partying started taking place right away. And then I ended up in WestCare, where we met.
Right.
And do you remember the week that you got there? There was a major squabble between, I think it was a Crip and the Bulldog. And
Oh yeah, bro. Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
That was crazy, bro. Yes.
Yeah, the cops came out, and I think I think it was pretty close to your graduation. You had that situation. What was his name? The guy Edgar from Sinaloa.
Oh yeah, I remember Sinaloa Edgar. He was the guy that was a loudmouth because he got lucky that a good portion of his case was knocked out by a Fourth Amendment ruling by the judge in his case. So he used to run his mouth bragging about how his lawyer was great and his connections down south and all that stuff. Yeah, I remember him.
Yeah, we're eating in the chow hall. And for the listening audience who doesn't know, we're eating in the chow hall, and the guy like slaps you in the back of the head. You're drinking your morning coffee. It's fucking everywhere, and you get so pissed. Dude takes off down the hallway, and you run and catch up to the dude, chase him down, and hit him. And I think a staff member even witnessed the whole thing and was pretty cool to you about it because nobody liked the guy Edgar.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an interesting backstory to that, which we'll talk about some other time. But how he was. He was moving coke bricks for his guys down there, and he would just mouth off to people, all that kind of stuff. He thought he was a badass and everything. And a week or so before that, he had said something to me, and I just was like, "Listen up, I don't give a who you're connected to. In fact, I got my own border brothers down there as well. And he was connected with the coke guys over there. I was doing the weed stuff, but it had even been like 10 years since I had even been into Mexico or even chatted with any of those guys. And I think that it was actually, 2005 Operation Greenspeaker. That was the last time that I even came close to catching a federal case or anything like that. So that had been like 7 years, 8 years before. And so he ran out afterwards. I threw my chair across the room, it seemed like, and followed him into the hallway, and I just cracked him one. And at the time I was doing, 30, 40 pull-ups a day and burpees, all that. You know how it is in there. We do a lot of exercising and everything. And basically just sent him flying, right? And almost immediately I got grabbed and pulled out a door, and it was one of the black dudes that was a staff member. And I thought I was in trouble, that I guess I'm going to go sit in county jail or maybe state prison for a while. And instead he starts laughing his ass off and says, "Hey, none of us on staff can stand this clown either. I'm so freaking happy that you did that to him." And he jokingly said something like, "You know who you look like right now? Remind me of?" I'm like, "No, who?" And he's all, "Edward Norton's character from Fight Club." And he's all, "And Jason, he reminds me of Brad Pitt's character from Fight Club." It was some funny stuff, bro. So definitely some funny stuff. That's a good story for another time for sure.
That place was, a lot of people think that, drug treatment centers, they're really nice. You got the Malibu kind of idea, the Betty Ford clinic.
Yeah, that wasn't it.
It couldn't be further from the truth, right? WestCare was really, really a joke. I hate saying it like that, but it was. They started to bring in guys, three strike case guys, level 3 and 4s from the California system, and they were starting to put them into WestCare as an alternative to prison incarceration. And it just changed the culture of the place there. So there was a lot of prison guys there who didn't care about being clean, and it really ruined the culture.
Yeah, it was a miniature prison in many ways. It was like, yeah, go ahead, bro. Yes.
Yeah, no, I had an incident with a guy my first day there. This guy had been smoking crack in the bathroom for like 3-4 days, and I get into this is my first day there, and they're like, hey, everybody, there's like 4 other guys in my room, and they're like, yeah, this guy doesn't let us turn the lights out at night because he's paranoid. I said, what? I said, that's crazy to me. So at nighttime, I'm like, this is going to be a problem because I'm going to try to turn the lights out. So I try to be really cool. I go, hey, man, we're going to turn the lights out. He said, no. I said, yeah, the voices got accelerated. And so the staff come in and they're like, what's the problem? And he's like, I'm not letting them turn the lights off. I know they're plotting against me. They're like, dude, you need a UA. And it kicked out. But that's the type of place it was, right?
Yeah, a lot of people are fooled by that phrase because at that time California was doing realignment, so they were sending a bunch of level 3 and 4 offenders out of state prisons and having them do time there. There was FBI, DEA, ATF referral cases, like yours was one. And so yeah, the place was basically filled with guys from Corcoran or San Quentin or Leavenworth, without the gun towers and more spacious rooms. Basically, that's how it was there, bro.
It was crazy.
Was far cry from the ideal treatment center. It had a lot of the political prison going on there, and it wasn't a waste of time, but definitely didn't get the spirit of recovery there. When I got out of WestCare, I don't know if you remember. I did 90 days there, and I was the house manager. I got voted the house manager.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm a federal guy, so I'm UAing all the time, and so I was house manager. I get out, and I had a breakup. I was able to keep my apartment through the 90 days. Me being in there, and when I got out, things go bad with the girlfriend, and bam, I get high right away. And so I get high right away. Federal probation officer comes visits me one morning. I wasn't expecting him. I open the door kind of unexpectedly. He's like, he's like, dude, are you loaded? I had been up all night. I'm like, no.
Of course not. Who, me?
Yeah, of course. He's like, I want you in my office by the end of the day to give you UA. I'm like, oh shit. I'm like, okay. So I get off the phone with him and I call my counselor, Cletus. And I call Cletus. You remember Cletus?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I call Cletus. I say, hey man, look man, I'm in a bad way, man. They're gonna send me back to prison. I said, I'm dirty, I relapsed, yada, yada, yada. He says to me, all right, man, let me get off the phone with you. I'm going to talk with the staff here and see what we can do, try to get you back in. I said, okay.
This call is from a federal prison.
I get off the phone with him, and a couple of minutes later, he calls me back, and he says, okay, here's the deal. We can get you back in, but you got to come in today. I said, oh, man, I've been high for a couple of weeks at this point. I'm like, that's an impossible task to drag yourself into treatment. I just left there. But I didn't do it that day. I did it the next day, and I went back for 45 days. Of course, you were still there,
right?
And yeah, I mean, like there was a lot of people I met on the second time around. Of course. Chad, all these guys.
Ryan, all those guys.
You remember Rajender? I think you and Rajender were selling cigarettes out of that place.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Me and Rajender were selling smokes. For people who don't know, at the time, the policy there was each person could bring one carton a week, and that was it. They'd have a visitor bring it. And Rajender owned liquor stores and all that. And so he just ordered his normal supply of marbles or whatever. And he'd have the guys leave it in the trash can or this and there. And then we were selling smokes because all those guys going through treatment, they start smoking like a freight train, and they smoke up their whole supply of packs or hand them out within 3 4 days by like Thursday or Friday, and they can't re-up till Sunday. They're desperate, and we were selling those things. He and I made like $500 each a month just selling smokes. In fact, there was so much traffic going into our room that some of the other dudes in there, Dave and that kid Jared and others were like, "Hey, you guys got to chill this out a bit." And I'm like, "Raj, they're right." One of the ways, by the way, that Rajendra and I got away with that at WestCare, because that it was against their rules to sell smokes or any of that. They considered that a contraband situation, and they would go into rooms of guys they suspected were doing that and look at their paperwork when we were doing our classes and stuff. Well, Rajender knows how to write in that, Sikh Punjabi language, from India with those characters, right? So he could keep all of the ledger of who owed us what and and when in his language, and there was no way for them to understand what it was. They would look at his stuff and not understand. They had dudes obviously that spoke English and Spanish. So Mexican dudes that thought they would get away by writing in Spanish, they'd just have a Mexican staffer who speaks Spanish read it and say, hey, they're up to something. But with Rajender keeping our notes in a language that none of the staff members understood, they had no clue. And he just was like, "Oh, it's just a list of my friends and some of their phone numbers or stuff like that." And that's one way we were able to keep track of who owed us what and everything. And we ended up, because of our guys in our room, we had two bunks and two single racks. So there was four of us in there, and it was a pretty good sized room, like the size of a decent sized hotel room, right? And so we started doing stuff elsewhere. We would let some guys come in, and then other dudes, we would, we would do the deals at AA meetings basically, or somewhere out on the yard in the courtyard where our weights and the pull up bars and all that was. But yeah, Rajender, that was definitely one of those. Yeah, he was a cool dude. He was one of the guys that actually got to meet a couple of the dudes one of the times. And there's other guys from out here that were around during times where guys came out from Detroit to visit, if you will, and got to see quite a bit of stuff sometimes. But we all kept our mouth shut. Nobody has ever spread anything, any of that kind of stuff. I hadn't dealt with Raj in, see, it was 2012 at this time. I hadn't even seen him since like 1999 or something, right? And so I had rented one of the apartments next door to my parents' old house, and it was just right along the fence line, barely, where there was like four or five of the wood pickets, and I knocked those out to where some people that came over to pick up could walk through my parents' old backyard to meet me there, or some of the traffic could go to my front door, which meant none of my other neighbors, uh, apartment neighbors, would see any of that back traffic. They would only see the element that came in the front way. And then, of course, I had other people that I would meet at different spots, especially the people that I didn't really want to have know, where I lived. And funny story with that, one time Rajender showed up unannounced and knocked on my parents' house door because my sister still lived there. She knew who he was and all that. And so she let him in and had him walk out the back door through the yard. And I had a couple mob dudes that came out from Detroit who were out there, and we're at my apartment in the front room, and we're weighing up the pounds that we got. I think we had 40 to 50 of them on that particular one. And you know how it is. You got to do the exchange, and you go later in many cases, weigh it yourself to make sure that none of them are short. And all of a sudden, bro, me and these two other guys from out of town, we hear this pounding on my sliding glass door. And I basically, I didn't know what to expect. I dove into my triple beam and freaking knocked it on the ground, almost broke it. And they're like, what the hell? And then I go, oh, okay. And I see Raj is like, hey, I want a big fat sack, fat sack. He used to say that, fat sack, like meaning like a QP or a half pound or whatever, and so I let him in. Told the guys, look, this guy's cool and everything. And I'm like, look, we need to break into the amount that's going back east by just a bit. Make a few bucks selling to this guy. So they were like, no problem. Just, you want to sell a half P or whatever to them, go ahead and do that. And Raj would do this thing like a Punjabi cultural thing, where they like clap their hands, as I'm putting more bud on the scale, and he's like, fat sack, come on, fat sack, JC, fat sack, fat sack. And we're just busting up laughing, bro. Some funny stuff.
The treatment experience there, I did another 45 days, I think they made me do, and I went to sober living. And then when I was at Sin City in their sober living house. And of course, I went to work with you while I was there, and I started getting high again. And I went back to prison pretty quickly, and they sent me back to Atwater, which of course it's a high security federal penitentiary. I get back to Atwater, and the bitch about going back to a penitentiary when you're on a violation is absolutely almost nobody there is going home. 80% of the population has life sentences. And when the guys see you come in and out, it really kind of like you got to hear all their shit talking and all that. The guys really lay into you about it. And so, you kind of show up, you're just hang your head, and, you got a year to do, and everybody else has got forever to do. It just kind of sucks. You would think they'd send you to a lower security facility just to do your violations, but of course they didn't. So I went back to prison, and when I got out of Atwater, I terminated my paper. I went to the halfway house in Portland, and that was when I decided to stay in Portland. I met some guys at the federal halfway house that I had, two guys specifically that kind of talked me into staying in Portland. One guy that I had been in the penitentiary with, and then another guy that I had just met there at the halfway house. And at the time, my mind wasn't like trying to stay out of trouble. My mind was in all the wrong places. And so I knew they were going to be getting out and getting their hands dirty and making some money and hustling. And I had met a girl up there, and they're like, hey, why don't you just stay up here, bro? We can make some money up here. And so one thing led to the next. And when I got out of the halfway house off federal paper, finally for the first time, I stayed in Portland to hustle. And I ran around up here, and when I decided to stay up here, of course, I had got arrested. I had a girl in Fresno, I had a life in Fresno, family in Fresno, and everything. And I think the expectation when I got arrested on the violation was that I was going to return to Fresno. And when I decided to stay in Portland, a lot of the people that I knew from Fresno were like, "What the fuck, bro? Why are you come back home?"
Leave a comment, and of course make sure that you become a channel member, because very soon we're going to start doing some very exclusive content that's going to remain members only, and we're also going to start releasing these videos members only first. Of course, also, if you do enjoy this show, make sure that you send a cash app to $Mob True Crime. Hit us up on our social media at Mob True Crime, and of course you can hit up Gene at Gene Borello, and then of course CEO Rod at Roddy J30. We've got another great guest, by the way, coming up later on in the week, who's another California guy who's been in the federal system, much like Jason.